All right, everybody, you know what's more boring than watching Louder with Crowder? Reading tweets about Louder with Crowder. I don't find a whole lot of entertainment from his series, but I also don't find a lot of entertainment from his tweets. So we're just going to go through some of those right now, and we're going to even begin with one I agree with. From Slugcat the Brave, doodled this on the way back home. If that's just a doodle, that is a fantastic doodle. I even like the little slime Suris right there. He's a goopy boy. He's a good goopy boy. The next one we have is from Salem with an S. Said, "Slime girl Suris I made when I was babysitting. She looks so shocked at the things they've seen. But Suris, I just fixed my desk. Too bad! Badumch has offered 500 channel points for an owl." The last one we have is from Mathematical Cabbage. "It was a peaceful summer day at the beach until a certain subathon timer showed up." Oh, Suris! Suris, my love, did you miss me? No. No, I really didn't. I did not miss Timer-kun. For those who don't know, there's a part of me that likes doing the subathons, and there's a part of me that doesn't. I don't like the things that make me have to do them, because they are almost always, like, hey, dental debt, or hey, you had a car breakdown, or, those things. Not a big fan, but I like spending the time with my chat that I get to during subathons. That's my favorite part. Timer-kun, on the other hand, he is the worst. He is my enemy. This man's right here. He's the equivalent of the villain that comes in every 2 or 3 seasons when the writing staff runs out of ideas. I don't know what that says about my originality, but who knows? Anyways, as always, everyone, thank you all for your fan art submissions. If you want your fan art to be shown in a future video, the best way to do so is to drop it into the fan art section of the Discord channel. With that all said, if you haven't subscribed, checked out the Patreon, or hit the bell notification icon already, maybe consider doing all of those at once, because you have 3 hands. But serious, he has tentacles? Well, yeah, that's why Timer-kun, at the very least, was able to hit the subscribe button. It's the one good thing he's done. But now let's begin with a Steven Crowder tweet I actually agree with. And I know that's going to be weird, because me agreeing with... Does this mean that I'm going to be falling down the alt-right rabbit hole? Am I completely going off of my rocker? Well, no. It's Steven Crowder saying Bill Maher is an unfunny hack pretending to be anti-woke for relevancy. We go deep to expose him as a wolf in sheep's clothing. Now, I don't agree with the last part. I don't think he's a wolf in sheep's clothing. I think he's an idiot in idiot's clothing. If I'm being perfectly honest, I think Bill Maher is not a sheep in any way, shape, or form. Yeah, broken clock syndrome? Basically. But we've done segments on Bill Maher and his position on various things like LGBTQ stuff, vaccines. He seems to pander a lot to the right now. He does this whole, I'm definitely a Democrat, definitely on the left side of things, and yet my targets always seem to be, awkwardly left-leaning. He's like, if you are on the left and you're like, hey, I'm tired of all of this woke shit, despite the fact that everything you say is going to end up sounding awkwardly right-wing, you're going to end up being very close to Bill Maher. So, you know what? We just begin with a tweet that I actually do agree with. A little bit. Awkwardly. But now, we go a little further. Steven Crowder has another tweet here. There have been further developments in the Trump raid. Hint, the media lied a lot, and the DOJ looks shadier than before. To help us make sense of it all, we have Donald Trump Jr. Also, the Oscars are apologizing to some Native American broad. There's a lot of layers to this tweet we gotta peel out. Just a handful. Just a handful. If we start off with the most obvious one, I don't need to point out that regardless of how insensitive Crowder may or may not be being here, we know that the entire point behind him wearing a headdress like this is so that he will get liberals angry. This is the point. I could sit here and go, this is cultural appropriation, and I could go down the whole spew of that, but none of that really matters. The point is, the reaction Steven Crowder's looking for with this is that. He's looking for people to call it out for cultural appropriation because pissing off liberals is his entire brand. As opposed to offering anything that is, of worth, the only thing he can do is make people that he doesn't like angry and make money off of doing so. I also just want to say that Donald Trump Jr., that's the person you're bringing in. Totally. That's going to be a very unbiased source when talking about the Mar-a-Lago raids. That's 110%. A guy whose entire notoriety comes from holding his father's name. That person is definitely going to get you straight edge shooting when you're trying to talk about anything in regards to his dad. But said, oh, and the runaway from Sam Suter. Yep. And then, of course, we need to talk about the last bit, the misogyny there. Like, I'm just going to say this right now. Broad, I'm pretty certain that's a term that we stopped using a long time ago. And even back when it was a term that was in vogue, it was mostly used as a demeaning term. Like, the last time I remember unironically hearing it is in Sonic Heroes, when Vector uses it to disparage Rouge. Who's this broad? Like, okay, come on, go back to Boston. Like, it's largely a retired term because it really doesn't have any positive connotations. It was Amy, was it Amy? Was it Amy? Oh, Smacko, you might be right. It was Amy. You're right, because the beginning of that one, it was Chaotix versus Team Rose in the jungle. You're right. Zoo Potato, thank you for redeeming your points for an Ada. Fucking degen. But no, you're right, because the exchange between Team Dark and them is Rouge going, those assholes are going to take all of my treasure, despite there being no reason for them to do that, other than the fact that Team Chaotix is notoriously poor, and they work paycheck to paycheck. Ha! Oops. Said, why was that a term for women? It's just like with most Sonic. Suris got Sonic lore wrong. Suris is a fake Sonic fan. But yeah, no, you're right. It was the exchange in the jungle when Vector did the whole, like, who's this broad? And Cream's like, you guys took Chocola Chow. And then a fight started. And Big the Cat was there, I guess. Rouge is like, don't trust reptiles. Then Rouge the Bad is racist. I'm also still kind of upset that I didn't put Rouge into the If Shadow Died story, but I had my reasons for it. Rouge and Amy will get a much more prominent role during the Shadow the Hedgehog story. We've gotten very far off the track of the Steven Crowder tweets. We should get back to that. You got a bunch of frames finished? Excellent. I'm also going to have Channel Pup working on the video itself, because now that I've taken over my editing again, I cannot afford the time it takes to do that. So Channel Pup will be doing that. So I will have all of that sent over to him once I do a playthrough of Sonic Heroes Dark Side Story, which I'm not looking forward to, because Dark Side Story is pain. The next tweet we have here from Steven Crowder, we don't need the Federal Department of Education. It's unbelievably expensive and made schools worse. Steven Crowder, as an individual, benefits directly from having idiots watching his shit. I don't want to be the conspiracy-minded person that says that this is a statement made specifically because it would mean that more dipshits would watch Steven Crowder and therefore pay money for goddamn mugs. But I think the more accurate thing to say is there's been a push lately, thanks to people like Christopher Rufo, to try to make it to where more and more people are homeschooling their kids as opposed to relying on public education. Now, should we have public education reform? Absolutely. But basically doing this ASAB, this all schools are bad, all public schools are bad argument, I don't think is going to work. Defunding the public schools isn't going to be what you think it is. It would probably be better to engage in school reform, Steven Crowder. Maybe we should have that conversation. Oh, wait a minute. We've just found ourselves in a different conversation entirely. That's awkward. Steven, weren't you one of the people that really railed against BLM and made the exact argument I'm making right now? Wow. That's awkward. So these shows just want to privatize shit? Yes. They unironically want living to be so expensive for people that they're not able to do anything with their lives except watch their garbage. That he just wants public schools to be underfunded so he can push private schools? Yeah. And private schools are the ones who generally send out homeschooling education. I say this as somebody who began my education in a private school, Pensacola Christian Academy, and we used the A. Becca literature for our schooling. The same literature that is sent out to private schools. There is one type of individual and one type of company that this rhetoric reinforces. And it's places like A. Becca. It lines their pockets. Whether it's putting people in those private schools or having people be homeschooled, in both cases, the same companies profit most of the time. The next one we have here is another one against education. It's Crowder saying that teachers across the country have been pushing divisive, factually incorrect, far-left curriculum, like critical race theory. Now, this is ignoring the fact that critical race theory is not actually taught in public schools. Like, it's not a thing that happens. What happened is Christopher Rufo started an entire campaign where literally everything could be called CRT. Your teacher talks about racism, that's magically CRT. Your teacher talks about the Trail of Tears, that's magically CRT. Your teacher talks about Martin Luther King, that's magically CRT. Ignoring the fact that none of that is critical race theory, and critical race theory is functionally just a thing that we use to determine where and when systemic racism may have occurred in a legal sense, and it typically only reaches far into the past. It isn't used to determine what's going on right now, or to call individual people racist, or to even say that America's racist. That's not what it does. It's a legal framework. It's a lens. Like, if we're talking about redlining, we can use CRT to determine when redlining happened on racial lines. And then we can make extrapolations from that to show, like, why certain minority communities have stayed poor over the course of time. That's a thing we can do using CRT. But that's not not a thing that's being taught in public schools outside of some maybe niche elective courses, and B, that's not a thing that is being talked about at all when you're mentioning CRT. But Chris Rufo's campaign of making sure that everything is called CRT has been quite effective, and we're going to be doing a video on that as well. We've already done 2 videos on Rufo and his first campaign against CRT and his current campaign against LGBTQ education in schools, but we'll also be doing one about his conversation with one Jordan Peterson. But we have some more tweets to get into real quick. And the format of these is going to look a little different because apparently I can't view Steven Crowder's tweets or anybody's tweets on my Twitter account right now. I don't know why. So we're in incognito mode. Households that hold graduate degrees have 56% of the student loan debt. Basically, we're going to have blue-collar workers pay for the degrees of doctors and lawyers. So if we're talking about student loan forgiveness, nobody's paying for that, Steven. If we're talking national, federal student loans, not private ones, but federal student loans, Steven, did you know that if you forgive a loan, you're not paying for anything? The money was already spent years ago, sometimes even decades ago. You're not paying for anything more at that point. That's just it. He blocked you, didn't he? I doubt he's blocked me. I think it's more a Twitter error. It's less that you're having to pay into this, and it's more that the money is just stopping at a certain point. And it's not even full loan forgiveness. However, note that households that hold graduate degrees have 56% of the student loan debt. Basically, we're going to have blue-collar workers paying for the degrees of doctors and lawyers. There's a lot of things happening with this tweet. The first thing is he's trying to make it so where the working class are weaponized against people who do essential labor in society as well. Somebody who works HVAC is just as important as somebody who works in the medical field. And pitting them against each other is, well, it's a very stupid thing, because at the end of the day, we're all workers. This is a way to take the ideas of class warfare, but instead of actually fighting upper class people, we're all workers fighting each other. This is largely unhelpful. It doesn't get us anywhere. It just divides communities further and further into smaller segmented groups and makes it impossible for us to do things like unionize or pull our votes together to make sure that certain candidates are going to get through and certain ones get blocked. Most communal efforts get blocked by divisive rhetoric like this. This is us versus them shit. But more importantly, it's also factually stupid. Not incorrect, because technically there is an angle of this that is kind of correct. If you think about taxes as an oversimplified, over-encroaching term that goes over everything, then by a certain angle, maybe Stephen's a little correct. But here's the thing. If you're paying 12% of your income right now as a blue-collar worker, if you're in that tax bracket, or 18% if you're in a higher bracket, say you're in construction, guess what happens if student loans get forgiven? Do you want to know what happens to your taxes? They stay the same. Do you know what happens if student loans don't get forgiven? Your taxes stay the same. Do you know what happens when student loans are completely forgiven? Your taxes stay the same. Your material conditions never changed. Nothing changed. But somebody like Stephen benefited from making you angry about it. Nothing in your life changed whatsoever, but somebody told you that somebody out there did something bad to you specifically, and that somehow it magically affects you, despite the fact that your material conditions never changed once during all of this. That's what Stephen's going for. Because when he does stuff like this, when he engages in this kind of language on his platform, not only does it create a fucked up version of class warfare where we're all infighting instead of going for the actual upper crust, but we also have this magical world where he's created an enemy for you that doesn't exist. Now your blue-collar workers are angry at your college graduates for doing nothing to them at all. The only slight that's happened to you is an imagined one. Nothing changed. I just want to reiterate that point and hammer it home. Let's say that you're in a higher tax bracket. You're paying 25% of your income in taxes. That's brutal. But whether student loans get forgiven or not, you're still paying the same amount. Nothing changed for you. This isn't a thing that ever even affected you. And yet people like Stephen have convinced you to get angry about it. What a sad existence that has to be. Where somebody on the internet can get you angry at somebody who's never done anything to harm you or your community at all. But Suris, imagine slides of the entire right-wing platform. Yeah, I know. The next one he has here is, freedom of speech doesn't exist anywhere else outside of the United States. But then, of course, there's a goalpost move right here. Not to its full capacity, at least. I don't even think that this is a true statement. I don't. Like, we have this idea in the US that we are the country with the most free speech. It said Crowder is even freaking Canadian. He is even affected. He lives in the United States, though, as far as I know, right? Let's see here. Let's see. No Wikipedia. I don't care about this. I want to see an actual ranking. Because now I'm curious. You want a globe that just has America wrapping around it? But that's just a regular globe. All countries are owned by America, don't you know? So, is America the country with the most freedom of speech? It depends on what metric we care about. In terms of everybody having full access to the internet, America has some of the highest numbers there. When it comes to individual people being able to say whatever the hell they want, America ranks the highest most of the time in global medians there. In terms of the media being able to report all of the news, turns out a lot of Latin America actually has us beat there. It wholly depends on what you mean by freedom of speech. And even if we were to pull this to an actual graph, regional median saying is very important that blank without state government censorship in our country. Global median of 38 countries, Russia and Ukraine are not included in the European median. This is from Pew Research Center. The United States does top freedom of speech in 2 categories. But the category of people being able to say what they want, we only top it by the slightest of margins. That's kind of awkward. Almost as if this statement from Steven is largely meaningless. Not to mention, you have to think about the actual types of speech that we allow over and above what other countries allow. We allow hate speech up to and sometimes including incitement of violence, so long as the incitement of violence is slippery enough. The NIFB have gotten away with this for years. So wait a minute. Is it actually good for us to have that explicit freedom there? Now, if the question is, should we have freedom of speech? Obviously. Duh. But there is a point where when you allow all speech of all varieties in every single way that it possibly can be measured, you inevitably end up silencing certain voices. A prime example of that is the incitement to violence. If I allow freedom of speech up to and including incitement to violence, then groups of people who are more likely for violence to happen to them, minority groups, women, trans people, these groups of people will end up having negated or much softened voices in that society because incitement to violence is allowed, which means somebody expressing their full opinions, if they don't agree with whatever the hate mob happens to agree with, can cause that hate mob to cavalcade onto them. And now suddenly we have a world where, yeah, anybody could say what they want, but you also had people that were able to incite violence on you. And any argument about, well, murder was already illegal, so you being murdered wasn't a speech problem, it very much was. The incitement was still allowed. E.g. Kiwi Farms. Kiwi Farms is a good example of this. I am of the opinion that websites like Kiwi Farms are perfectly viable candidates for getting the axe off the internet. Freedom of speech is not a simple conversation. It's not a simple yes or no thing where you can just take an absolutist approach on something and then some dipshit on a YouTube channel can sit there and shake their head repeatedly every single time you give a point against particular bits of freedom of speech because they agree with the idea that sunlight is the best disinfectant, ignoring the fact that even when sunlight has happened on certain types of speech, all it takes is everybody being unilaterally wrong, like happened in Nazi Germany with eugenics, to show the failings of that particular system. Freedom of speech, like most things in life, is incredibly complicated. I am of the opinion that we should allow freedom of speech except for hate speech. Now, what is considered hate speech is a different question, and different countries have different versions of what hate speech is. And that's its own problem. But bear in mind that that's a problem that exists for all kinds of speech, including incitements to violence. Very obvious and clear incitements to violence have happened on places like YouTube and places like churches in the United States. And yet, the hammer does not come down on them, generally speaking, outside of the hammer of public opinion. We can't agree on what hate speech is, and we can't agree on what incitement to violence is, but we can agree that perhaps there is a line that should be drawn, and any line that is drawn where speech is concerned is going to be arbitrary. But that's fine, because it literally can't exist any other way. And to argue that it should just be unilaterally allowed, even the United States does not have unilaterally allowed freedom of speech. That world doesn't exist anyways, and constructing it will create the scenario that I already pointed out earlier. But we have another one. So it's called the paradox of tolerance. Yep. Paradox of tolerance. If you are tolerant of everything, you are necessarily tolerant of intolerance, and therefore you just become intolerant as well because you enable the intolerance. Congratulations. You have magnified the problem. Like a moron. But there's more tweets here to dissect. This one's very simple. This one I'm actually going to throw as a question to my audience. If you happen to be watching this video, let me know what your answer to this is in the comment section below. But do politics matter in relationships? Now, my argument to this would be yes, absolutely. If somebody's politics are racism, they believe that immigration bad, and you as a person who is brown should be kicked out of the country because they're an ethno-nationalist, that is not only ideology, but that is political ideology. If you happen to be in a relationship with that person and you happen to fit into that minority group, guess what? Politics matters in your relationship a lot. If you're with a transphobe and you happen to be trans, you're an NB who's closeting, or you happen to be with somebody who maybe they are pansexual, but they are also transphobic. So despite the fact that you transitioning might not affect their attraction to you in the slightest, you still won't because you're worried about that. It's not that you're with a partner who is straight and you guys can have a conversation and even a severance if things happen. It's you are paralyzed. You're transitioning, you're expressing yourself shouldn't change anything about your partner's opinion on you because their sexuality makes it moot. But you still won't because they're a transphobe. Guess what? That's a political opinion. And guess what? That mattered magically in your relationship. Politics matters a lot in relationships, and I don't say that to say like politics is the end-all be-all for everything, but if you and your partner get together and you don't know what each other's political stances are, you will end up coming into conflict with one another where that is concerned. That's not to say that you should date somebody who is your echo chamber. You should date somebody who only agrees with your own political positions. Absolutely not. But it's naive to believe that those political differences will never come into play during your conversation. The minute that a pregnancy is involved in your conversation and y'all aren't financially ready, and the conversation about adoption versus abortion comes into play, guess what? Politics has now mattered a lot in your relationship. There's an idea that's pitted a lot, and even people in my family have tried to pit this idea, that politics shouldn't matter in relationships or friendships or anything like that because ultimately politics is just whichever team you're rooting for. And this comes from a fundamental misunderstanding of politics as just Republicans versus Democrats or Tories versus Labor. Like, this idea that politics is just whatever team you bat for, as opposed to the complex mixing of ideologies that make you a person, comes from a fundamental misunderstanding of politics. The two things we're not supposed to talk about at a table are religion and politics, and most of that's because nobody knows how to talk about those without going at each other's throats. In relationships, it is important to, at the very least, know what political opinions your spouse has. Consider liberals versus Labor in Australia. Yep. Like, politics is not which team you bat for. Politics is, what do you think of minority groups? How do you think wealth should be divided? Where do you think taxes should go to? That's politics. Ooh. Warhawks, thank you for redeeming your points for an owl. Owl. We have 2 more from Crowder. This one is, the left has tried to equate nationalism with racism, but being a nationalist just means you're proud of your country and you look out for what's in the best interest of your country. Now, I disagree with that. This is like trying to whitewash what nationalism is. Nationalism is not being proud of your country and looking for its best interests. That's just patriotism. Nationalism is identifying with your nation, especially to the exclusion or detriment of the interests of other nations. Patriotism is, I'm proud of America. Nationalism is, fuck you because we're America. That's the difference between those two things. But what is the actual point of a tweet like this? Well, we know that Steven Crowder is batting for the same people that Marjorie Taylor Greene is, and there's been a concerted effort from people like Marjorie Taylor Greene to deaden the term nationalist, make it sound much more soft, make it to where Christian nationalism, despite the fact that that's basically theocratic fascism, can be called something that everybody should aspire to. So why do people say things without thinking? Because we, as people, largely speak first. We have type 1 thinking that is our survival mechanism. Type 2 thinking, which is our logic center. We typically engage in type 1 thinking more often than not because society and people in general would run slower if we constantly took the time to take everything we said and everything we could possibly say into account before they leave our mouths. However, I think this is a completely logical thing for Steven Crowder to say, because I don't for a second believe that he's saying this without understanding what he's doing. The goal, largely, is to change the conversation about nationalism to one about patriotism. This is the thing that happens with the eugenics movement as well. Eugenics is a racist ideology. It believes in hierarchies of races within humans. But when you talk about eugenics as a simple science, you deaden the meaning of the word, and you eventually make the word more accepted around people. Boo Dargan, thank you very much for the follow. Sienna says that's just self-preservation. A virus can't spread if the body is already immunized, so it has to disguise itself to make the immune response look elsewhere. Yeah, that's the idea. Owlsnerf, thank you for the follow. Yeah, eugenics didn't start with Nazi Germany. It didn't end with it. Eugenics was incredibly popular here in the States. And still is. So let's not give Crowder too much credit. He still thinks he looks cool wearing a holster. I'm not going to ad hom Crowder here. I'm going to give him the benefit of the doubt that he knows exactly what he's doing. I think that's both fair, and it points to the actual danger of his position. But we have another tweet. Technically, it's 2 tweets, but we're going to call it one because it's a couple of videos from his Twitter. And he says in this one, this is child abuse.
What we are hearing from over there is the child angle. They're saying this is a sexualization of minors, opening up children to things that they should not be seeing.
I think they just don't know the full story because this is not about children. This is not about opening their eyes to this and making them see this. It's about support for his family. And his
really? Is that really what's happening inside, though?
We brought our kids. We're like, this is something good for them to see.
Yep.
Okay, so bear in mind that this individual here giving their opinion on what they think is the reason for something, and these individuals in here giving their reasons for why they are doing a thing will always necessarily be different. The point of a cut like this, when you're editing, is to make it seem like one side is being dishonest about something. And that dishonesty can be exemplified when you show a quick cut from one position to what seems to be a contradiction of that position. But that trick only works if we're talking about the same person. If we're talking about one person arguing one thing about trans people and then we cut to them saying something completely different, that works. We have shown a contradiction that is internal. But if we're showing something Steven Crowder said, and then we show something Donald Trump said and said, aha, the right doesn't agree with itself. Well, no, duh. The right is not a monolith. There's a ton of people who believe a variety of different things who are right-wing. There are people who are right-wing who aren't even transphobes. There are people who are right-wing that agree with unions and workers' rights. They're harder to find, but they do exist. The idea that any one person is a monolithic version of their side's beliefs and ideology is, well, it's to try to oversimplify things. To look at me and think that I believe I agree with everything Xanderhal says, or everything Vosh says, or Shark says, is dumb. Because I don't agree with everything Shark says. I don't agree with everything Vosh says, everything Xanderhal says. I don't agree with everything Telltale says, Jimmy Snow says, going full on through. We don't all agree on everything, because we are all individuals. So showing a clip of me and then showing a clip of Vice Rhino saying something different doesn't mean that suddenly magically a bunch of lefty atheists on the platform have a hypocrisy issue. But let's go ahead and see the rest of it.
This is something good for them to see.
Yep. How old are your kids? Like
11 and 8.
Oh my God.
Are there children in there?
I haven't been in there. I do not think so.
So the person says, I don't know. Their answer was, I don't know, and then you cut showing that there are children in there. Is this one even a child? Hold on. Is that even a kid? That does not look like a kid. For that to be a kid, you would have to be angling yourself very far down. That feels kind of gross. And these kids aren't even in there yet.
If there are, they're with their families, and they're.
So yeah, like shown right here with their families. Like shown here with a family. Shown here with a family. Shown here sitting with a family. Like, again, this editing trick that's used to go like, hey, look, obviously the left are lying to you about things. They're lying about all of this. Look at all these contradictions. Only really works if you're talking to the same person the entire time. So they had to record this with a hidden camera, clearly. Yeah. Yeah. And of course, he does say in here, watch the full video of my team infiltrating a kid-friendly drag show. Spoiler alert, Antifa shows up with guns. Oh, scary. I thought guns were supposed to be a thing that everybody had access to as a bit of a human right thing. I'm pretty certain that that's just supposed to be a general thing you're okay with. Antifa showing up with guns shouldn't mean anything. Why would that fucking matter? The second half of this is me wanting to look through some of the replies real quick. But shameful, God help, because Steven says that this is child abuse. Steven, I know what's best for your child, Crowder. This is child abuse, I agree! Okay, cool. Leaving society now, says the person with the MAGA hat on. Does being opposed to Antifa make you, by definition, part of the fascist? Not necessarily. And I say that I say that knowing that there's going to be people in my audience who are going to get mad at that, but no. If you say you disagree with Antifa, what you mean by that and what somebody thinks you mean by that may be entirely different. My reasoning is this. If you say you disagree with Antifa, and in your mind, Antifa is a group of violent extremists and nothing more, you disagree with your idea of a group of people. That doesn't necessarily mean that you are yourself pro-fascism. Now, if you're a political pundit who is completely and totally educated on what Antifa actually is, what the historical significance of the of the movement was and is, and then you make that statement, then yes, I'm perfectly fine saying that, yeah, you're probably some flavor of fascist. You probably are. Especially when you take someone like Marjorie Taylor Greene, who literally shouts out slogans for palingenetic ultranationalism. Like, we can find that. A lot of times when you find an anti-fascist, you're going to find a fascist. But it's not necessarily true, because when somebody takes the position of being anti-Antifa, they might not necessarily even know what the fuck Antifa actually is. Sucker says most of the people who are going Antifa bad are fascist, at least the ones on TV. Again, if we're talking about pundits, we're talking about people whose job it is to be educated on this matter, and then they make that. They make that decision while being educated. If that is their position, after being educated on the matter, then yeah, cool. Perfectly fine taking that one. But, how's it going, Pappy? But that was a smorgasbord of Steven Crowder info. I'm sure that that's all been dumped, and most of it has been completely forgotten by people at this point. But Randall says, but that's actual journalists that do look into it and know better, or would if they weren't ... So the main problem with these radical groups, and by radical I mean 100% or nothing, never agree what exactly they're angry with. Yep. So I've heard people that go right-wing fascist. Like, I have friends who are conservative, and I wouldn't call them fascist. And I'm not saying that just because they're my friends. I say that because they are individuals whom I've talked to about their belief system, and it doesn't line up with fascism. But there are people like, again, Marjorie Taylor Greene, who I'm perfectly willing to ascribe that label to, because they engage in all of the things that would make me believe that, yes, you actually are this type of person. Palingenetic ultranationalism, the idea of a nationalistic rebirth, and ostracization of other people outside of your society, outside of the people that you personally think are worthy, yeah, I can ascribe that to someone like that. Bex the Toon says, bonjour, hello, how are you doing? Said, what, Mulch being another example? Matt Walsh literally calls himself a theocratic fascist. If there's anything that earns you that label, it should be claiming that label at that point. But, with that said, if there's anything I've missed during all this, let me know in the in the comment section below. Conversations can be started down there. But with that said, as always, everyone, if you haven't subscribed already, please consider hitting that button. If you have not already checked out the Patreon, there is a link to that down below as well. And if you haven't hit the bell notification icon over on YouTube, do it, or I will find you and probably offer you like a peanut butter and jelly sandwich in exchange for being part of the notification squad. Sugar-free, though. I hope you're okay with sugar-free jellies. For reasons. Anyways, insert end of video tagline here.